to video 5, where we're going to combine two very powerful budgeting techniques and illustrate how they work together by building an actual budget for Kristen and Brandon, our example couple. In this video, you're going to see how these budgeting techniques all come together to simplify the budgeting process and set you up for success. But before we get to Kristen and Brandon, let's review what we learned about in the last video, the floss budgeting method. You'll recall, perhaps even from your own painful experience, that the reason most well-meaning budgeting attempts fail is because they're too complicated. They take too much effort and suck too much energy with all the tracking, categorizing, and endless monitoring. Because of the level of effort that's involved, these methods, they just aren't sustainable, and most people give up after only a few months. The floss method changes this by simplifying the budgeting process. With this method, you only track 3 categories: fixed and leveraged spending, operating costs, and savings and slush. This allows you to focus less attention on meticulously tracking and categorizing your expenses and more attention on the things that actually matter. I ended our last video by promising that I would address a key question you likely wondered about as we discuss the floss method for budgeting. How much can I actually spend in each of these 3 categories? Well, to answer this question, we're going to use an important rule that's easy to remember and will transform your finances. This rule is the 70-20-10 rule, and it's been widely adopted as a very effective personal finance practice. The rule is very simple, and here's how it works. You allocate 70% of your income to cover your living expenses, 20% to cover your savings and investing, and the final 10% is dedicated to charitable giving and paying down debt. To make this even more clear, here's how the 70-20-10 rule works with the floss budgeting method. You have 70% of your income that you can put towards your fixed and leveraged and operating costs. Next, 20% of your budget then goes towards savings and investing. And the last 10% goes towards a combination of giving or paying off debt, especially if you have credit card or consumer debt. So the 70-20-10 rule tells you exactly how much money you have to spend in the various macro categories based on your income, and thereby helps you to follow key financial principle number 1, to spend less than you make, live within your means, and invest the difference, just like we talked about in video 3. The floss budgeting method then guides your allocation of spending between fixed and leveraged and operating costs, while allowing you the flexibility to spend those resources to meet your obligations as you see fit within the goals and parameters you set. By combining these 2 principles together, you have an incredibly powerful budgeting technique that I promise will enable you to successfully achieve the goals that you set at the beginning of this course. To illustrate how this works and to make it crystal clear, let's walk through an example together. And as we do this, I'm going to fill out the floss budgeting and 70-20-10 worksheet that goes with this video so you can see how that works and so you'll be able to use it yourself. Like I introduced earlier, Kristen and Brandon are going to be our example couple. Kristen and Brandon have been married for 6 years. They have 2 kids, and together they bring in $6,000 a month after taxes. Now, I recommend working with after-tax dollars rather than gross income because it simplifies things, and it's generally what people are used to seeing come into their bank account each month. Now, based on their income, which I'll enter into this blue cell at the top, Kristen and Brandon allocate $4,200 each month to cover their fixed and leveraged spending and operating costs. This is 70% of their after-tax take-home pay. 20% or $1,200 is allocated towards savings. The final $600 is earmarked for charity and paying off debt. As Kristen and Brandon explored their expenses, they found that $2,300 worth of those expenses fit into the fixed or leveraged category of the floss method and can be broken out as follows. $1,400 for their mortgage payment, which covers principal and interest on their loan, homeowner's insurance, and property taxes. $150 for normal utilities, including water, gas, electricity, $250 for a car payment, $100 for their phone and internet, and $400 for health, life, and auto insurance. After subtracting their fixed and leverage costs from 70% of their after-tax income, they're left with $1,900 to cover each month's operating expenses. They expect to spend about $900 of this each month on groceries and general household consumables. This leaves them with roughly $1,000 a month for the other operating and variable costs that come up. For example, in this month, they spent $100 on fuel or gas for their car, $150 on clothes, another $150 on entertainment, $250 on auto and home repairs, $100 on activities for their kids, and they're setting aside $100 each month for a vacation they plan on taking in the summer. Remember that as Kristen and Brandon review their expenses at the end of each month, if their operating costs for the month come in lower than the $1,900 they have budgeted for their operating expenses, this becomes slush money that they get to spend, save, or invest however they would like. In this month, they ended up with $150 of slush money, which you can see highlighted in green. Great job, Kristen and Brandon. They decided to spend $50 of that on a fun date night. They spent another $50 on some household decor, and they decided to roll the remaining $50 over to the next month. For their savings, Kristen and Brandon began this budgeting exercise with $15,000 saved in an emergency fund. Now, while this is a great start, their goal is to have 6 months of their fixed and leveraged and operating costs in a liquid cash account that can be used in an emergency. Based on their current expenses, they need to save about $25,000 to accomplish this goal. As a result, Kristen and Brandon have decided that they will take the $1,200 in savings for the first 9 months of their budget and add it to their emergency fund. This is money that acts as a safety net in an emergency. For example, if someone loses their job or there's a medical emergency that isn't fully covered by insurance, or if the furnace in their home were to suddenly stop working. Having this buffer will enable Kristen and Brandon to ride out any short-term setbacks. After they've achieved their goal of 6 months' expenses in an emergency fund, they plan on starting to invest and save that money for retirement. We'll talk all about getting started investing and saving for retirement and the importance of doing so and starting early in the upcoming videos, so stay tuned. Finally, Kristen and Brandon will use the last 10% of their income, or $600, to focus on debt paydown and charitable giving. Coming into this budgeting exercise, Kristen and Brandon have a $7,000 loan balance remaining on their car. By paying an extra $300 a month towards their auto loan, they'll be able to pay off the loan in half the time and save themselves nearly $1,000 in interest. This will enable them to become debt-free, other than their mortgage, in a short period of time, which will then free up an extra $250 a month in their budget that's currently included in their fixed and leveraged expenses. By eliminating their car payment, they'll be able to focus additional funds on investing and growing their wealth, as well as increasing their operating budget and giving. Kristen and Brandon decide to donate the final $300 in their budget to various charities. They give some to their church, some to the Red Cross, and some to a local charity that's focused on doing good in their community. Now, some people might wonder why I recommend donating a set percentage of your income to charity, even if you're not a millionaire yet. The answer is simple. If you don't learn to sacrifice and give early on, even if it's just a little, then you'll likely never give later. Giving is perhaps the best way to retain an appreciation for the things that you have. And it's a way to do good and genuinely bless others throughout your life. Now, Kristen and Brandon, they are all set. They have a budget that is reasonable, it's easy to stick to and monitor, and it's sustainable for the long run. It's simple and allows them to pay themselves while meeting all of their obligations without feeling overly squeezed. Finally, it also makes room to pay off debt, to be charitable with others, and sets them on a path to beginning to build real wealth through saving and investing. I hope that this example, which by the way is modeled after a real-life situation of a couple that I worked with, illustrates to you how simple and powerful the FLOSS method of budgeting and the 70-20-10 rule can be when put into practice. These two principles will enable you to harness the power of budgeting without burning out prematurely. And these principles work regardless of your income level. Now, it's likely that some of you out there are thinking to yourself, how can I possibly live on 70% of my income? I'm barely scraping by now on 100%. And that's a common response and a fair question. First and foremost, remember that these strategies and principles are not intended to make you feel anxious or depressed. They're intended to make your life easier. So don't get down on yourself if you're not perfect at it this month or next month or even the month after that. This is a journey and it can take time. Congratulate yourself and celebrate the small successes along the way. It will get easier as time goes on and as you develop the habits and muscle memory of saving and investing. Next, remember that the application of these principles and strategies may look different person to person and family to family. The trick is to identify what works for you. If right now saving 20% just isn't feasible, that's okay. You are not alone. Save what you can and feel good about the progress that you're making. Then, set some realistic goals and chart a path for how you can get even better. So, are you ready to try this out for yourself? Trust me, if you follow the FLOSS method and the 70-20-10 rule, budgeting will be easier than it has ever been before. So go ahead and download the FLOSS and the 70-20-10 worksheet and fill it out for yourself, including the income and expense sections. The income section will allow you to determine the amounts in your budget based on the 70-20-10 rule. As you fill out the expense section, carefully categorize your expenses into fixed and leveraged spending and operating costs. In less than an hour, you'll be able to organize your financial strategy and put yourself on a path to financial freedom. By following these strategies, I promise that you'll be able to stay on top of your finances and put yourself on a trajectory that is consistent with your financial goals and objectives.